posted on Twitter, just finished a very good conversation with President Xi of China, discussed in great detail the coronavirus that is ravaging large parts of the planet. China has been through much and has developed a strong understanding of the virus. We are working closely together. Much respect. Because of time, I'm just giving the committee a tiny taste of Donald Trump's fawning, starstruck, sycophantic embrace of everything the Chinese government was telling him in 2020, but I will happily offer a lot more for any colleagues who think that the hunt for the origins will somehow absolve the last administration for telling Americans that COVID would magically disappear at Easter time, or everybody should just take hydroxychloroquine, or refusing to wear a mask, or never developing a national plan to defeat the disease. Whether it was bats or leaks or bureaucrats who caused it, Donald Trump was the biggest apologist in the United States of America for President Xi and the Chinese Communist Party. He could have directed the intelligence community to lead a COVID-19 origins investigation back in March of 2020, 3 years ago. He did not. He wasted precious time minimizing the risk of the virus and lavishing his praise on President Xi. He could have taken the origins of the pandemic seriously and held the CCP accountable. He could have pushed back against the CCP for interfering with the WHO's investigation into its origins, and he could have asked our intelligence community to intervene. He did none of those things. And everyone should remember that. Let's take the politics out of it, and let's get to the bottom of what happened.
When I say that Jamie Raskin is a national treasure, this is why. Here he hits the nail on the head in terms of this campaign by Republicans to somehow declare victory in the aftermath of the Energy Department assessing that the cause of the pandemic was, quote, most likely a leak from a lab in Wuhan. Now, I should note, too, that 4 other agencies still judge the pandemic as likely being the result of natural transmission. 2 agencies beyond that are undecided, all of which is to say no one really has any definitive answers about the origins of COVID. But regardless of where it came from, one side does not win depending on where it came from. It's literally just information. And yet still that hasn't stopped Republicans from seizing on this anyway as some victory for them because it retroactively validates some late-stage fear-mongering about China by Trump. And of course, Trump only decided to pivot to blaming China once it became clear that he had a massive problem on his hands that he didn't anticipate with COVID. But as Jamie Raskin mentioned, among the biggest cheerleaders for China during his presidency was Donald Trump. Raskin read one such tweet. Here's another. China's been working very hard to contain the coronavirus. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency. It will all work out well. In particular, on behalf of the American people, I want to thank President Xi. So I get that Republicans are desperate for a win, but I'm not sure that pointing to the guy who spent the early days of the pandemic regurgitating Chinese talking points and CCP propaganda is the win that they think it is. And yet, let's be honest here, we know why Republicans are so desperate to try and take this bizarre victory lap. They think that it'll serve as an effective distraction for the fact that Trump utterly failed in responding to COVID. Remember, Trump had no national testing and contact tracing plan, no national masking plan, no mitigation plan. He just wanted to cosplay as a TV doctor and suggest injecting bleach into your arms. He wanted TV time. He wanted attention. And all of this was so poorly executed that under his watch, we had 20% of the world's COVID cases and deaths, despite having only 5% of the world's population. So if you're wondering why Republicans and Trump apologists are so desperate to diffuse responsibility here, that's why. Like, I'm sorry, but I'm not sure how Republicans point to anything COVID-related as a win. Remember, prior to vaccine availability, the excess death rate among Republicans and Democrats was roughly even. But then, once we were in the post-vaccine period, the excess death rate for Republicans was about 76% higher than for Democrats. How Republicans can look at the hundreds of thousands of people who died due to some misguided partisan allegiance and still claim victory on anything related to this pandemic really does put their delusion on full display. These Republican officials should be apologizing to the families of the victims, not taking some stupid victory lap because they may be able to pin the blame for the virus's origin on a lab. And yet that's their priority, scoring a political win no matter how many lives it cost. In fact, that's exactly what Lauren Boebert tried to do in an earlier sparring match with Jamie Raskin, during which he again put the GOP in its place regarding COVID.
You're right. President Trump was in office when the COVID virus was released from a lab in China, from the Wuhan lab. And he tried to make that very clear that this came from China. And reporters regularly dismissed that.
I appreciate the gentlelady's passion. There are two facts that she should perhaps be alerted to. One is that Donald Trump, on more than 20 different occasions, defended the performance of the Chinese government, and specifically President Xi, in terms of his treatment of COVID-19, and said he was doing a wonderful job and a great job, and they were working closely and they were constantly in touch. So if there's a problem with the Chinese government unleashing a virus which has not been proven anywhere, but it certainly could be true, you would have to pin that on your favorite president, Donald Trump, not on Joe Biden. The second thing is President Trump's own special advisor on COVID-19, Deborah Birx, I'm sure you're aware, and I'm sure you've read her book, said that the lethal recklessness of Donald Trump's policies about COVID-19 cost Americans hundreds of thousands of lives. So you don't have to believe anybody on the Democratic side of the aisle. That's Donald Trump's own special advisor on COVID-19.
So you've got Boebert here applauding the fact that the lab leak theory may be correct, but again, so what? How do Republicans win if it turns out that the virus came from a lab instead of a bat? Donald Trump still bungled the response, regardless of what the virus's origin was. It doesn't change his response depending on whether it came from a lab or not. Trump blew the response regardless. Trump coddled Chinese President Xi regardless. The origin doesn't change any of that, and the fact that Republicans are out there pretending that it does is as ridiculous as it is bizarre. And yet, despite all of this, the GOP's positions here really are indicative of a larger problem on the right, and that is that they operate within their own hermetically sealed ecosystem, devoid of any facts. And so even though Jamie Raskin made these points very clear and very obviously, Republicans still think they scored a win because they get to shout out the Mad Libs that make up their talking points, like lab leak. But it's not about reality. Hell, it's not even about American lives, as we've obviously seen. It's about feeding the audience a narrative and giving their supporters permission to feel like they've somehow won in a situation where over 1 million Americans have died. All of which is proof that when it comes to the GOP, dead Americans are apparently a price they're willing to pay so long as they can congratulate themselves on some cheap political win. So good on Jamie Raskin for wading through the Republican distractions and putting back into perspective the fact that Donald Trump was responsible as President of the United States for his own handling of this virus, irrespective of how it originated, and for putting into perspective the consequences of an administration that was very clearly more concerned about pretending that everything was totally fine versus actually seeking substantive solutions. Republicans may be hoping that they can rewrite history with time, but that's not going to happen. They didn't have the spine to do what was right back then, so they don't get to pretend that they were justified now. Before you go, a quick announcement. I've started a Spanish YouTube channel. Democrats desperately need to be able to appeal to Spanish-speaking audiences, so this is me doing my part. To help that channel get going in the algorithm so that we can finally start spreading our progressive message and breaking the conservative stranglehold on Spanish-speaking media, please subscribe and watch a few videos. The link to that channel, called Brian Tyler Cohen Espanol, is right here on this screen. And of course, to see more of my content in English, make sure to subscribe to this channel as well. The link is also right here on this screen. Thanks so much for watching.